Hello, welcome. We're still in the middle of March, which is Women's History Month, and I want to thank you. We've covered some great women throughout the month, and today's lecture is going to be interesting as well. We've met everybody from billionaires to the first serial predator. So, I mean, we have met a myriad of people. And I think today you're going to find this woman interested because her archetype has been seen before. If you ever watched Harlem Nights, where the great Richard Pryor and Eddie Murphy and Red Fox played many of the parts that we're going to talk about during today's lecture. But the head of it all was a lady who ran Harlem. Her name was Madam Stepanie St. Clair. I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm Lady TrenettWilson. Welcome to Royal Black and Elite. Hello, Royalers. Thank you so much for joining me today. If you're new, hello, welcome. Would you consider hitting that subscription button? And everyone, leave your comments down below. So let's get into our lecture. Stepanie was not born in the United States. And I think that's kind of what added to some of the mystique around Stepanie. She always wanted to seem and appear exotic and not from the United States. And so she was an interesting woman. She was born in the West Indies in a place called Martinique. And her birthday was around December the 24th, 1897. There's always some question around whether it was exactly in Martinique, but we think her birthday is correct according to records. Her mother wanted to provide Stepanie with a good education and upbringing, but her mother grew ill. Her name was Phyllisine, and she grew ill and she passed away. So at that point, she became an orphan. So many of our Royal Black and Elite stories have these stories where the parents are removed or they pass away and the child becomes an orphan. So from 1900 to 1911, she moved from Martinique and she went to Montreal, Canada as a domestic worker. However, she was not meant for domestic work. She already was spending money on clothes and looking good, and she had a vision of where she wanted to go even as a little kid. It was said that she liked her clothes and her jewels, and a man was always in her face because of her beauty and her ability to speak well, and she spoke Spanish and French. Now, she migrated from Canada to New York in 1912, and she went through a crash course to learn how to speak English. Now, you know, a lot was going on in 1912. We had, during that year, the Titanic sank. And I left the story down below if you'd like to meet the first black man, or the only black man, who was a passenger on the Titanic. He actually perished in its sinking, but you never hear about him. And so I thought you'd find that interesting. Now, Harlem was experiencing like a jazz revolution, and immigration from Europe was on the rise. And of course, there was bootlegging going on, there was a lot of partying going on, and people were using substances. Now, up on her arrival to the United States, she ran into a crooked guy named Duke. You know, it always starts. She was young, and Duke was really bad news. And the reason I say that is because his suggestion was to her to make money was that she could sell her body. But before she went that far, Duke was taken out during a rival gang fight. He was caught in the crossfire. So he was out of her life. But then she met this guy named Ed. So they were dating, and one thing that Ed found out about Miss Stephanie was that she was a genius when it came to math. So they started selling substances. Well, after Stephanie had made $30,000, she looked at Ed and she was like, you know, I don't really want to be in this relationship. So she told him, hey, you know, I think we need to go our separate ways. You have your own business, I'll have my own business. Well, Ed did not like that, and he got physical with Stephanie. Now, story is that she and him were tussling and they were fighting and body blows was going and everything was being furniture was getting moved and Stephanie pushed him. He lost his balance and he hit his head and he perished. Well, Stephanie found out two things in that situation. One, she knew she didn't want to be a man with a man who put his hands on her. And number two, the cops in Harlem, New York were extremely corrupt. And all she had to do was give them a little bit of money to cover up what had happened. And that's what she did. So she began her enterprise of being a criminal, really. And I want to be clear here. I don't want to glorize anything Stephanie did. Stephanie took lives. She was not a good woman. The reason I bring her as a story is because Black culture is just so complex. It's so many pieces to us and about us. But one thing that is true in all situations is if we're going to be good or bad, whatever we do, we are the best. And this woman was one of the best criminals in Harlem, New York. And she was able to walk away from her criminal enterprise intact. So that's why I thought this story so interesting. So on April the 12th, 1917, she invested $10,000 in a Harlem lottery game. In those days, they called it running numbers. So she became the queen of running numbers. I told you earlier she was really good at numbers, so she could keep all that straight. And then they also had something called societal banking. So what that basically was is that people would invest their money to her, and she would then turn it around and invest it throughout the community, and that's how they would make their money back. Now, why did they do that? Because banks did not allow Black people to keep their money in the bank. And this was one of the ways that they could keep their money is banking with Miss Stephanie. She had a wonderful reputation. She was basically running the lotto. She stopped selling the substances and that's all she was doing was the numbers. So that's another reason. She wasn't like this person who was going out hurting a lot of different people or anything. And let's just say Stephanie lived well. She lived lavishly. She liked houses, cars, and clothes. She was making about $20,000 annually, which would be a little bit under a million today, around $780,000. And she employed the neighborhood. But the corrupt police wanted more money, and she wasn't willing to give it. They were doing all kinds of things. And they put her in jail for 8 months on a trumped up charge. Well, she didn't care. She began to put out articles in newspapers and ads stating who amongst them, the policemen who were taking money in kickbacks. She did not care. So they couldn't stop her. But one person who tried to stop her and who started a war with her was a mobster named Dutch Schultz, and they were going back and forth. And he would like rob her or kidnap her number runners or even hurt them, and she would do things too. So they were going back and forth. And she finally said, "You know what? I'm about tired of this." The police were on her back, he was on her back. So they decided this is the first problem I'm going to take care of. So she called the police on him. They call it swatting today. And they busted in on Dutch Schultz and they seized $12 million in cash. That would be about 190 million today. So before he could get any retribution on her, however, the commission, which were the people who were over him, like Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky, they made the decision to get rid of him. So his story was cut short. His as the rapper says, his TV got turned off. So that's what happened to him. So now the next step was she had to extricate herself completely from the crime game altogether. She had made her millions. She was sitting on a fortune. She was good to go. So Bumpy Johnson took over her business, and the madam officially kind of retired. But she was always respected to the day she passed away. While she was retired, she actually married someone, and his name was Sufi Abdul Hamid. Now, he wasn't nothing but a scammer, and She gave him so much money to make your head spin. I mean, she bought him houses. She bought him cars. She really, really loved this man. This man was no good. One night, he went out and he met this woman. Her name was Foo for Tom, and he fell in love with her the first night. So if you saw that movie Harlem Nights, when that guy went and slept with Sunshine, and he called his wife right then and there and told her he would not be coming home. So that's exactly what happened to Madame St. Clair. Her husband called her and told her he was not coming home. Now, brother said he wasn't coming home, but one thing that he did need was her finances. So, though he didn't want to be with her anymore, he still did need her to bankroll he and his new woman's lifestyle. You see, she was a fortune teller and she needed the money because they were going to build a Buddhist temple. Well, Madam Stephanie, being the crime boss she was, wasn't trying to hear that. And she pulled out her revolver and discharged it toward his direction 3 times. She missed, however, and he survived, but she had to go to prison for 10 years. Now, that's pretty rough having to do 10 years for not hitting someone, but she did. But I will say he didn't get her money, so I'm sure she was happy about that. After her release, she laid low and she was legit all the way. She passed while still wealthy in December 1969. She passed 1 year after actually Bumpy Johnson, who passed away July 7th, 1968. Allegedly, he was at this bar late at night and he was getting him something to eat. He had some coffee, chicken, and grits. Right before he was getting ready to take a bite, all of a sudden he clutched his chest and fell forward. He was gone from a heart attack. So that is the crime boss, Madam Stepanie St. Clair. Again, we've seen her on Harlem Nights. We've seen these stories in passing, but didn't really know the detail of who they were. I hope that you enjoyed our lesson. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and click down on another video to continue learning. And I really appreciate you spending some of your time today to learn more about the Royal Black and Elite. Thanks for watching.